This is Mike Gonzalez with Green Vigilante Media, and today I am interviewing Sid Akbar. Sid is a Green Party candidate for California Assembly District 9. Sid, thank you for being with us. Thank you for talking to us, and go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like to.
Thank you very much. How you doing, Michael? My name is Sid Akbar. I am a high school teacher at Grant Union High School in Sacramento, California. I'm filming in my classroom. Messy desk is over there, so I'm kind of on a student desk, kind of make a pretty background. But I have been a member of the Green Party since the days of Nader 2000. I've proudly voted Green in every single presidential election. I remember voting for Black woman Cynthia McKinney instead of Obama. I was really proud of that. Really proud of Jill Stein. Really proud of Mr. David Cobb. I've got a chance to meet him, talk to him, and it's been wonderful being Green in these last, 19 years it seems. And it's also been a difficult time to be a Green. I came to this country as an immigrant. I was a child. I was 3 years old when we came to California, and grew up mostly as an American, mostly as a Californian. Woke up 9/11. Even though I was Green, and even though I understood what was going on globally, seeing the impact that the U.S. foreign policy can make on people, and then the reaction entering 2 wars got me seriously politicized and active. I figured I would get into journalism, which I did for a couple of years in 2001, 2002, and then finally came back and decided that the most effective change we can make to the upcoming generation is to be a public school teacher. So for the last 12 years now, I've been here at Grant High School teaching CTE, Career Technical Education in Media, and joined the county council after Trump. Because talk about another terrible event in history that got everyone active. When Trump won, which blew everyone away, because even Edward Snowden said Hillary had a 90% chance of winning. We all thought it was going to be Hillary. So when he got in, it got a lot of women active. It got a lot of us who were sitting on the sidelines watching you guys organize for us to finally step up and start getting active. So now I'm on the county council, the Green Party of Sacramento County. So if you guys are in Sacramento County watching this, come check us out. The county council meets once a month. And during one of the county council meetings, we looked at which state positions are going to be open for the next election. And the district that I live in, which is Assembly District 9, had a progressive, had a corporate Democrat incumbent. So I've decided to start a campaign, take them down, turn California green.
Well, we're glad you're running green, Sid.
Thank you.
You mentioned something during your introduction that you are a journalist. So you were a post 9/11 journalist with CNN, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what kind of insight did that give you into the state of our media?
Oh boy, I was in the trenches. So let me do a little bit of a background. In high school, I was a bit of a theater kid, which, God bless the theater kids. They're alternative and they speak through the arts. I got involved in digital media at the turn of this century when Apple and Sony won an Emmy for developing FireWire, right when the cassette turned digital and became digital. And I was in the forefront of the digital revolution. And in LA during the 2000 Democratic National Convention, rah, rah, gore, I was invited as an up-and-coming filmmaker as one of the youth delegates. So there was a bunch of us. There was Tatiana Ali from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There was Taj Mowry. There was Allison Mack, who's in jail now, but she was one of the youth delegates that went to Democratic National Convention. And I was there, and I got a chance to meet Ariana Huffington at that time too. It was really wonderful opportunity to kind of wake you up and realize that there's a big scary world out there. There were police officers on horseback. There were helicopters. There was Rage Against the Machine music. The city felt like Vietnam. It was crazy. So on that trip, I met a couple of other young filmmakers, and some of them happened to be working at CNN, and I ended up meeting a producer at CNN. I was working for a nonprofit organization. It was called Earth Train. We did youth media development internationally. We were in Puerto Rico a lot. We went to Egypt. And when they saw my footage from going to Puerto Rico and from Egypt, they said, hey, if you've got any work for us, let us know. We can work together and maybe put something on the air. I happened to go to Pakistan with the nonprofit I was working with. I was 21 years old. I happened to be volunteering in the two largest refugee camps in history at that time, Jalozhi and Shamshatu. They were on the Peshawar border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I came back and 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden, where I was and the footage I had in the refugee camps became very relevant. So they flew me to Atlanta, where CNN headquarters are, and I spent 2 years back and forth between Pakistan, Egypt, Moscow, Bishkek, 21 years old, 22 years old, collecting footage, uploading it. It was the days before YouTube. So I still have the footage on the beta tapes and on VHS, but you can dig around and find it. But the point was that there was a war happening in Afghanistan that had been going on since '79. The Russians had invaded, and the civil war broke out. You might remember American influence at that time was that they were supporting the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters.
Yeah.
They were supporting and training Osama bin Laden to fight against the Russians. And when the Russians failed, just like we've been failing for the last 17, 18 years we've been in Afghanistan, a civil war broke out. There were two groups at that time. There was the Northern Alliance, the Northern Army, which was, I think, under Massoud. And then he got assassinated by a camera bomb. But the Taliban took over. And the Taliban made so many internally displaced people and so many refugees that there was 250,000 people in this refugee camp that I worked in called Jalozhi. And they would truck in water, and the kids would come running behind these water trucks, and the UN would bring in food, and it was a tent city in a desert as far as the eye could see. And I would interview people who were saying, how do we start schools in here? We've been here since 1979. We've been here since 1989. We've been here since 1998. And how do we survive? And as a journalist, I was recording and interviewing and bringing these stories back to CNN. But God bless my producer. He really wanted to get them on air. But the guys who called the shots, they were like, well, we don't want to see that kind of trauma, and we don't want to see the children you've had to help bury. There were women who got infected because they were 8, 9 years old, 11 years old, getting their periods, and they didn't have the facilities and the resources to take care of their own cycles, their own menstrual cycles, and these kids would die, and other people would die, and there was rampant theft. And these refugee camps are just horrible, squalid. They're like our shelters you see right now under the bridges in Oakland, except the UN was running water and flour and other meal kits to them. All kinds of corruption. Anyway, my producers over at CNN would say, hey, didn't you have some footage of Osama bin Laden Elementary School? Because like I was driving in a taxi one day and I saw the school, and you've been to third world countries, you know how schools are like these little office places and office buildings. And anyway, there was one school on the side of this big building that said Osama bin Laden Elementary School. And by the time I pulled out my camera and filmed it, it was less than 10 seconds of driving past it. And CNN wanted that footage? Like, what is that going to add to my people? What is that going to add other than sensationalize the whole brown people are evil, Muslims are evil? The Muslim Registration Act was going on at that time. It was just a terrible time. And all the graphics we saw, because we were in Atlanta, this is, you know, like a 40-story building. It's got food courts in it. I walked past Ted Turner and America Under Attack, America's New War, all these complicated graphics to instill fear and push the narrative that we needed to go into war, which we did in March 2003. So it was a terrible experience as journalists. It was terrible. I felt like I was selling my soul, but they would fly me anywhere I wanted to do any stories I wanted. I could get away with it. You know, my father's Pakistani. I speak Urdu. I've gone there many, many times. It's a third world country. You have to bribe officials. You have to not be targeted for kidnapping. So there were certain things I could get away with. But I just couldn't ultimately, I could not work for corporate media. As good as we think CNN is, you know, they're sort of like the Fox News, the CNN end of it. CNN, and compared to what journalism is like now, back then it was better, but still we couldn't do it. I'd say 9 out of 10 of us employees would be walking around going, and it was an intense time. 9/11 was a very intense time. We were like, why would we want to instill fear in the viewership? Why can't we extend humanity? I did a story on a refugee boy who learned English reading newspapers, who started selling trinkets on the street. I did stories about the difficulties inside the refugee camps. I did stories about dialogue and communication that opened up, people who ran away from the Taliban. But instead of making that human story connection, The fear-mongering and the sensationalism is what they went behind. So I couldn't do it anymore. I went back to college when I was 22, 23 years old. My friends were getting their degrees, and I wanted to study history, and I wanted to be a history teacher, and I wanted to teach kids history. The moment they looked at my resume, they were all like, whoa, you've got broadcast media all over the world. You know how to make websites. Why don't you become the media teacher? So for 12 years, we've been doing school news and school journalism, and I'm proud of it. I mean, like, my kids do the school news, that's great, but sometimes they win awards and competitions. And I think to myself, my dream is, don't just go home and make these silly YouTube videos, which they do, but go make something, talk about recycling, talk about homelessness, talk about universal health care, talk about what's happening in your schools, make news, make journalism. And it's funny because then they show me the front page with Jamal Khashoggi, right? The poor fellow who got dismembered in Turkey. And they're all like, Akbar, you think this is where we want to get to?
That's impressive. I mean, that's an interesting introduction with your insight into what's happening on a world scale and with the media. So let's get to your campaign.
Yes, sir.
In your platform, what does the Green New Deal mean to you? And you know, on a state level, what can you do?
Okay. All right. So the first part of your question is what it means to me. Well, before I got active engaged, I was just a registered Green since the days of Nader 2000. I assumed that the Green Party was the godsend. They were the most sophisticated forward thinkers in environmentalism and policy and medicine and human rights and social justice. I really assumed that once I came into this party that I would be amongst the foremost progressives around the globe. And knowing that they had these 10 key values and the 4 pillar platforms made me think what clarity that you approach something holistically. So divorcing our Green New Deal from what the progressive Democrats have proposed, our original Green New Deal, what it meant to me was a global movement, a global understanding of addressing not just ecology, but economics in such a way that when you do invest in a Green New Deal, it's good for farmers, it's good for nurses and doctors, it's good for educators, it's good for the transportation industry. It can't just be focused on emissions. It can't just be focused on shifting away from fossil fuels. Although those are key parts of the element, if you don't do it right, you are going to impact the transportation industry. You're going to impact the farm industry. You're going to impact the healthcare industry. So a holistic Green New Deal means that there has to be free healthcare. There has to be free education. There has to be feminism. There has to be proportional representation. Because how can you say that you're an environmentalist or a feminist and that you're for the poor? How can you claim those 3 things yet vote for war, which destroys ecologies, which destroys communities? You can't claim to be a feminist if you can also go and vote for war. And that's a problem with our Democratic Party. That's a problem with both of our parties. I don't mean to steer the conversation where I want to go, but I have a criticism for both the parties in which they both speak to their absolute voting base, the ground level people who just go out, show up at the post. They both preach that they're going to help humanity, that they're going to help the poor, that they're going to help make America great again, or whatever it is that they say that they make their voters believe. They claim to do that. And then as you work up your step in the party and you go to the local upwards, they get further and further away from their voting base, and more do they end up working for Wall Street. Wall Street is the enemy. It's not the military-industrial complex, because they too work for Wall Street. It's the big banks. We think, oh, the government's messing up, the government's doing this and that. The government is a base, is a puppet front of the bankers who are really trying to get everything that they want to squeeze the last dollar they can from our fossil fuel industry, the last dollar that they can from harvesting our forests, from maintaining a for-profit healthcare system, for maintaining dilapidated education. I've been a school teacher for 12 years. I can tell you there is a school to prison pipeline. And the way it's done, again, I don't mean to detract from the Green New Deal. The way it's done is that we are passing kids who are failing first grade, second grade, third grade. They get moved up no matter what their grades are. By the time they come to high school, when the grades matter, they can't deal with it. They can't handle it. They don't show up. They end up on the streets. They end up on continuation school. You don't finish high school, you're 4 times statistically likely to end up in jail. You're 4 times more likely to become a criminal, to do petty crime, to grow your own pot and sell your own pot, because there's no other way you can survive except illegally, because we haven't given you the skills. We as educators have not given you the skills to be effective in an economy where you can be highly skilled. So if you are going to have a Green New Deal, yes, you have to think of the obvious, of the ecological wisdom behind being green, but you also have to think about what are the underlying sustaining factors. You need a highly educated, highly skilled, highly efficient economic workforce. If you don't have a healthy workforce, you don't have a healthy economy. If your workforce is sick, your economy is not going to be healthy. Why we don't realize that? I've made a list of countries that offer free healthcare that I've memorized. I try and do it alphabetically. Austria, Australia, Belgium, Canada, right above us, Chile, the Czech Republic, Denmark, France, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Israel. Israel, we give them $10 million a day. They have free college, they have free healthcare. Iceland, Italy, Japan, Norway, New Zealand, the Netherlands. Poland has free healthcare. Poland has free healthcare. Sweden, Switzerland, Slovenia, South Korea. Scotland, Ireland, Wales, they all have free healthcare. In America, it's not free because we don't realize that if we have a healthy workforce, we have a healthy economy. No, it's a small group of people, executives and shareholders in these pharmaceutical and in these health insurance industries who are profiting in the millions. Their salaries are in the millions. And then at the end of the year, they get bonuses in the millions. And that's not just them, the shareholders are doing it all. It's a for-profit industry, and that's not green. That's not sustainable. That's not going to help us shift from a fossil fuel industry to a renewable energy industry. How? Second part of your question, I'm sorry for the very long ramble. How is that going to affect us on a state level? Well, amongst my platforms on my campaign card, I just picked these up. I'll ship you one. The first thing we need to do is we need to, on a state level, get single payer healthcare. There's a current term, I can't remember the bill right now that's being proposed in Congress, and I'm talking about federal level Congress, not state legislature. That's called
HR 1384, introduced by Jayapal. Is that what you're speaking of?
Jayapal, Medicare for All.
Yes.
Exactly. Medicare for All is so close. It's so much better than the Affordable Care Act that Obamacare was. It's so much better than the Band-Aids that are addressing the physical symptoms as opposed to the root cause. Medicare for All is approaching what really should be universal single-payer healthcare for all. I am behind it, and I think we need to do that at California. I don't know. Are you in California?
Yeah, I'm in California. I'm in the South Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Wonderful, beautiful, progressive part of the world. It's a great place to be. I grew up listening to KPFA, Radio Free Berkeley. I grew up listening to Dennis Bernstein and Amy Goodwin, Democracy Now! It's a great place of the world to be to get progressive media, which, by the way, our media is the fourth branch of the government. The fourth branch of the government is our propaganda machine. Anyway, so in California, what we could do here locally is we can introduce a single payer for the state because, pardon my French, F whatever the federal government's going to do. I don't want to associate myself with the red states and Bible Belt South, but here in California, progressive, liberal capital of the United States, minus maybe New York, maybe Oregon, and a few other places that legalized pot before we did. There were other states that legalized gay marriage before we did, but we're still the bastion of forward thinking. We can still, as a state, get universal health care. Step one, instilling a Green New Deal. After that, we have to make college free. We have to make college free because if we have low skilled and unskilled workers, they will never be qualified to command an income that you could do if you got a degree or certified. And I'm saying if you were a mechanic, if you were a dentist, if you were a lawyer, if you were a doctor, if you were a plumber, these are highly skilled. And when you have that kind of training, you command a salary that'll force you to lease an office, lease vehicles, lease equipment, office machines or mechanical equipment, hire a low-skilled staff to do your regular work. And if you want to fix the economy, you have to create professionals. We have to offer free certification and degrees and all forms of higher education to create professionals, because they command the economy. They command the economy. If we keep producing low-skilled, untrainable youth out of this high school that I work at, even though they're wonderful people, the citizens are great, their citizenry is great, if they're not qualified to take on a high salary commanding job, we're going to keep importing talent or offshoring our talent. That doesn't help us locally. That does not help us locally, not very green. The third thing we got to do for a Green New Deal is we have to address our homeless situation. We have to provide shelter now, tonight, now, yesterday. Oh my God, because not just are they our neighbors and we have to take care of them, we have to stabilize them, but homelessness is causing a lot of public defecation, abandoned trash. Their shelter gets destroyed in the weather conditions we've been having with this new climate. And they are adding towards the impact on our tax dollars. They are adding towards the deterioration of our local environments, our streets, and we have to love them. We have to provide them a place to help them. And once we can do that, we can address the bigger changes in the Green New Deal. We have to shift away from fossil fuels. The easiest way to shift away from fossil fuels, I don't know if you know what diesel is, but diesel has been around forever. And if you know anything about old use carbon and the carbon that's on the surface of the planet, that's part of what we call the carbon cycle, anything that grows and dies like trees, their carbon stays in the surface. It's the fossil fuel carbon, the one that's been down underground for millennia, that's not part of our atmospheric carbon cycle. That's the stuff we're bringing up and burning. If we shifted to diesel, it would be the easiest way to go carbon neutral super fast without changing our infrastructure of our roads and gas tanks. The problem I have with electrical vehicles is that their energy is still sourced majority from fossil fuel. Yeah, they can say, I'm not buying gas and I'm not, emitting gas, but running their vehicle is we're using petroleum, we're using coal, we're using fracking to do electric vehicles. We've got to come up with another solution. Diesel would be alternative solution. However, if we source all our energy on the grid through renewable, there's many different options. We Greens are decentralized. We don't all have to say solar. We don't all have to say wind. Depending on the region, we can use biothermal, we can use aqua veins. There's different options that we can explore. Yeah, so those are some of my solutions I would look at a state level.
Interesting. I see you also advocate for a publicly owned district, electric, water, and gas.
Yes, yes. I'm an old timer. I know I kind of look young, but I've been around for a long time. I remember Enron. And I don't know if you remember the Enron collapse, but fixed income folk were getting energy bills that were 3 times what they were paying all of a sudden. People's pensions had disappeared. It was terrible. But there were 2 places in California that did not suffer. One of them was where I live in Sacramento, and the other one was LA, both because Sacramento and LA have what we call public municipal utility districts. In Sacramento, we have SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. It is a elected board of governors run by the community. And because of the way we produce and source our energy, we did not have the spikes on energy that PG&E had in Enron. PG&E and Nestle are some of the most horrible corporations on the planet. Horrible corporations on the planet. Again, a throwback to the early 2000s. You remember Cochabamba? Cochabamba, where Nestle went down to Latin America and they tried to privatize all their water, and the village of Cochabamba, I think it was in either Chile or Venezuela, but the whole village uprose against Nestle because they wanted their rainwater. Nestle has been trying to privatize water forever. PG&E has done the same thing with our energy. Most of the state of California does not get to choose where they source their energy from. That's been monopolized by PG&E, and PG&E needs to be broken up. It needs to be broken up, and it needs to be turned into smaller municipal districts like we have in SMUD, like they do in LA, create a public board of governors to have them supervise what's happening, to have them oversee what's happening with the business model. And if it fails, it's like a co-op, you know? We, as the citizens within that district, are the ones who are invested in that business. What a great idea if we use socialist tactics to solve what's happening in capitalism. We get into a lot of arguments over what socialism is, but the best thing about the Green Party is I personally happen to be a socialist. That's my personal belief, but my larger political view is that of the Green Party, because again, talking about decentralization, what might work in my region might not work in other regions. Other regions might work better under private production, under capitalism, whereas in other parts of the world, maybe state ownership should work. I'm scared of communism. My definition of communism is state ownership of the means of production. I worry about that. I worry about a single party. I worry about a single party running anything. However, if you let the community vote for it, then it's a social unity. It is like a, what's another word? It's like a city council, it's like a school board, right? Have the local people do it. I have this other really strange radical idea. I don't know if people are going to consider me crazy, but you know how cops are just the worst, most violent against people of color and men and Black people, and are disassociated from their citizenry? I propose we do this. I'm sorry if this is off topic, but what if instead of career cops in unions, what if we elect on 4-year terms community police from people who are local in the neighborhood, who know the knuckleheads, who won't shoot and kill them, but can say, come on, man, you're still doing this? Look at you, you're 25 years old, right? Instead, we have these cops who get, 10 times as much training on their firearms than they do on de-escalating a situation. And I swear to God, they're scared of their lives. I've seen a video of this guy who was pulled over in his truck and he said, hey, show your ID. The guy dives in to get his ID out of the truck, and when he comes out, he gets gunned down. Luckily, he survived. Do you know what video I'm talking about? Have you seen that video?
I haven't seen that one, no.
Crazy. The cop says, can you show me your ID? He reaches out, he comes out, he's like, why are you shooting me? I got my ID. The cop was scared. Here in Sacramento, Stephon Clark, it's a big deal right now.
Orlando Castile?
No, he was murdered. Yes, no. Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about? These cops are really scared. They're really scared. Why are they so scared of us? There's something wrong, and I think the whole institution needs to be shifted. There's this, what is it? AB 392, the police reform, the lethal force law. That even though a lot of us support it, it's another band-aid on a symptom. What we need to do is we need to flip the system on the head. You know how many teachers suck? You know how many teachers are criminals, just like cops? Why don't we do the same thing? Why are there career teachers who are failing their kids, and not getting them prepared for the real world? We need to elect everybody. And with our green ranked choice voting and proportional representation, we can elect the people who run our municipal district, we can elect our school teachers, we can elect our police officers, we can elect everyone like Cuba does to help make it a more equitable, proportionally represented society.
So that's police reform is certainly a topic I'm very interested in. Here in our the major city in this area is San Jose,
Yes.
and we have been fighting for expanded role of the independent police auditor, and I've kind of come to an observation that I think our gun laws and the abundance of guns and our support for everybody owning guns is what I believe psychologically, or when you talk about the fear of police officers, what weighs very heavily on them, that when they do pull someone over, and if they are a criminal, they very likely can have a gun. And I think it leads police officers to be fearful. Do you think that's related to policing in America?
I don't think so. I think if I really had to call it out, I'd say police are probably racist. They're probably infiltrated by white supremacists. They probably are bullies by nature. I mean, I hate to stereotype all police, but I imagine someone who says they want to go serve their country. Why don't you become a firefighter? Why don't you become an EMT? Why don't you become a doctor? What makes you want to have a badge and a gun? I don't know. Maybe I was raised on hip hop. I don't know. but I don't want to give police an excuse for their cowardly and violent behavior, whether or not they're afraid that we have access to guns. That's why they're afraid that if they pull over somebody that is a criminal and has a criminal record, perhaps they're carrying, and so now they're going to gun down people. I don't believe that, because let me give you 3 examples of white men who've killed people who are alive. The Pittsburgh church shooter who went into the black church and gunned down 13 black people. The Jewish synagogue shooter, the shooter in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting. All 3 of those white shooters survived. They lived. Whereas unarmed black people are dying in the droves. It's not about being afraid of guns. I sincerely don't think so. I think it's more about this fear of people they don't know. I think it's xenophobia. I think it's being afraid. When they see a white kid with a gun, they're like, we'll capture them alive. But if it's a black man who's unarmed, they may have a gun. But to address your point about our gun laws and gun policies, imagine our culture. Imagine our culture, our cowboy culture. I went to Japan a couple of years ago with the high school, and I'll tell you, the first thing that blew my mind, none of their bicycles were locked up. None of their bicycles anywhere you went. They left their garages open. I went down to a restaurant. This woman showed up with her Apple MacBook and her purse, put it down on the restaurant table, and walked away for 10 minutes. Because in Japan, people are much more middle class. There isn't that high upper class and there isn't that low class, that nobody even is worried about you going and stealing their purse and their wallet. Here in America, we have such inequities. And on top of that, our media, our music, especially our mainstream one, because I think this is done on purpose, glorifies the criminal. Most of our heroes in Hollywood, our hip hop stars, are on the fringe of the law. And what that does is it's created this culture where people think they can speed on the freeway, and people think they can cut people off, and people think they can go around and take advantage of weaker people. Unfortunately, being where I am in an urban inner city high school, a lot of our graduates end up doing petty crime. They end up, breaking and entering. I had a student, unfortunately, has it been a year yet? He was shot dead after trying to rob a liquor store. He was 17 years old. What society would put a 17-year-old boy in a situation where he wants to rob a liquor store? Clearly, he needed something. He probably needed money, so he was too poor. And the other thing was he had access to and the idea of being able to get away with it. That's a weird culture, man. That's a weird culture we've created in America, where people rob liquor stores. It doesn't happen in places like Norway. That New Zealand shooting, New Zealand took 3 days. They banned assault rifles. Here in America, we're going to watch our kids die. I did some research. 2017 mass shootings were 340 mass shootings. 2018, they dropped. So we're looking at every 25 hours, we have a mass shooting. Every 25 hours, we have a mass shooting. And it's our gun culture. It's our gun culture. And I know hunters. I love hunters. I believe in the Second Amendment. I think you can have a pistol. I think you can have 2. Have a rifle, have 2. Have a shotgun, have 2. But I've drawn the line on the AR-15. You're not allowed to have Uzis, right? You're not allowed to have M1s. The AR-15, and people argue with me, they're all, well, it's a 223. As if telling me the technical definition is going to stop children from getting murdered. As if telling me, well, the magazine capacity has been limited to 15 in California. It's really not bad. Has that stopped schools from getting shot up? It's as if they want to gaslight you into the technical terms of it. Oh, please protect your home, protect your wife and kid, have that fantasy of being a savior all you want, but the AR-15 has got to go.
Interesting. So since we're on the topic, Stephon Clark was shot there in Sacramento. Were you involved in any of those actions after, I believe they didn't prosecute the police officers, is that?
No. Yeah, so Stephon Clark, as you know, was shot in the backyard of his grandmother's house. The police were actually on the safe side of the wall looking over where the garage was, and there was this brief flash. I've seen the footage on the cam, and it looked like he might have had something in his hand, and he was another unarmed black youth, 22 years old. killed by the police because honestly, by looking at the way the police talked, and even after the shooting, by the way, they unloaded 20 rounds on him. They unloaded the bullet. So after 20 shots, they say, "Are you okay? Have you been hit?" As if they imagined they were being shot at back. It was outrageous then. I don't want to say we, I want to say Sacramento blocked the freeway. They stopped the Kings game. They stopped entrance from the King game. They created some immediate protests. And it was a little bit unruly. Our city council has been in flames since, with people coming by and talking about the displeasure of the violence of the police. But then when the city started making suggestions on what was allowed at protests, from the thickness of the picket sign posts to how many people can gather where, we all knew that a not guilty verdict or the investigation was going to show no fault of the police, from Anne-Marie Schubert and Javier Becerra, our state district attorney, was also supervising, and they both came to the same conclusion. So right when that happened, we all showed up, and this time I showed up too, to the police station on Freeport Boulevard, and we stood in solidarity, and it was heavy on our hearts. Looks like the district has shut off the lights. Okay, there we go. Saving you your taxpayer money by automatically shutting off your lights, ladies and gentlemen. So we gathered together in solidarity, and I'm proud to say that members of the Green Party Council showed up, members of the community that have been activists for years showed up. It got a little heavy at some point. Some in blue line flags were being burnt in the parking lot of the police station. But what really happened that was truly outlandish was that the following day, we have a rich neighborhood. We call it the Fab 40s because you have downtown, the streets are numbered and lettered 1, 2, 3, and ABC. And by the time you get out to the 40 blocks, you have these beautiful mansions, old part of Sacramento, beautiful neighborhood. And the movement, which was organized by the Table and had a lot of the local BLM and other organizations present, they were marching through, and it was a beautiful scene. You know, you had people coming out supporting them. These rich white people were opening their bathrooms. There were also people who came out in MAGA hats, and then they snatched the MAGA hat and burned it. So there were these scuffles. But then this corral tactic happened where the police corralled everyone onto a bridge, blocked both sides, and then arrested 84 people, including students and clergymen, and a great journalist a student journalist from Sacramento State, who wrote one of the best articles I've read, from when they took his phone to how he was locked up and who he was sitting with and the prayers offered by the ministers. 84 people were arrested for a nonviolent protest. And that created such an outrage that people were saying, well, what's the point of us being nonviolent if you treat us like criminals anyway? And how dare you arrest 84 people? And it created a big turmoil. Now, we've had a few rallies and protests in March since then, and nobody's been arrested because the city recognized that it was not good for them. But, you know, we're torn, we're heartbroken, at least those of us who are part of the BLM movement, that such injustice could happen. Such injustice could happen. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a very sad what happened to Stephon Clark, and you know, subsequently that there's no accountability for it. I want to move to a topic that's I think important to, especially right now in America, where there's a lot of things happening overseas and in other countries. What's your view on American foreign policy and the militarism of our supposed defense?
Department of Defense, right?
Yeah.
Listen, we don't get to vote on the Pentagon. Nobody gets to vote on the Pentagon. That's something that our representatives have put together and have run. Oh my God. Okay, so let's start with reparations. America is at least after the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89 was the single global superpower. And the reason we emerged as a global superpower is because we were dealing with both sides of the war in World War II. We were doing business with the Allies, we were doing business with the Axis, and while they were getting more and more in debt to us, we were about to enter the 50s. You know, we had the roaring 20s before the economic collapse of the Black Friday and the Great Depression, but we also had an amazing post-war economic boom. But at that time, at least there was Russia that we had to kind of compete with, the two global superpowers. So, you know, we weren't the only 800-pound gorilla on the block. But then 1989, Cold War ended, Berlin Wall fell. It was us. We were the richest country in history, with the biggest military budget in history, with the most assets. And it all goes back to the fact that we built our entire economy without paying a labor workforce. Recent studies have shown that in America alone, the pollination that the bees and the insects provide to our farming industry, if we had to pollinate them ourselves, would be $51 billion a year. If you add sunlight and water to that, it goes into 23 trillion globally of free assets that nature provides us. And much like nature has provided us with free services that we're destroying nature, so now it's going to end up costing us in forms of water and pollination. The same thing goes with slavery. We built an economy without paying a workforce, and every one of us, it doesn't matter if our parents just migrated or if you're just here right now, or if your ancestors never owned slaves, it doesn't matter. Anyone who's living and working in America has benefited and reaped the benefits of our free labor workforce in slavery. We owe them reparations. Now, moving along. After the Civil War, note that Black men were first given the right to vote before white women were. Kind of interesting that our first president was a Black man, not a white woman. And that's the same thing that happened with our post-civil rights movement. Men, even though they were now Black men, had the rights to vote, own property. Women did not receive, and still arguably have a glass ceiling, not arguably, clearly have a glass ceiling, that they were not allowed to divorce, vote, own property, and such. So what we had was we had an industry of men who were making the biggest decisions in redeveloping our country post-Civil War. We never had colonies, so we never had the luxury that England or Germany or Belgium or France had. Remember, France had Vietnam, Spain had Cuba, and we started going in there and we took the Philippines, we took Cuba away from the Spanish in 1898, and we started our American imperialism. I think American imperialism starts with Cuba, 1898. Viva Fidel, thank God for Che Guevara. God bless those guys. I don't know why we still have Guantanamo Bay there. Apparently we're paying them for that land, but I wish we were not there at all. However, Cuba got its independence. Other countries started getting their independence after the World War II. Gandhi, without a single shot fired, defeated the British. And mind you, the turn of the century, 1900, the British Empire was the biggest empire on the planet. The sun never set on it. From Hong Kong to the Caribbean islands, to the West Indies, to India, they had everywhere. Gandhi got India free and independent, and then countries in Africa. My mother was born in East Africa. Now it's called Tanzania. She was born in Dar es Salaam. Both her parents, my grandmother and grandfather's grave, are in Kenya, in Mombasa. And it was 1967. She was 20 years old. She was 20 years old in 1967 when the signs on the hotels and swimming pools that said dogs and coloreds not allowed finally went down. 1967, that's not that long ago. I was born 13 years later. So decolonization got rid of the old European superpowers, but American imperialism all started right afterwards. So now we have Israel, which, let's be honest, is an American colony. We have Guam, we have Hawaii, both who we took from Japan, mind you, and that's why Japan wanted Pearl Harbor, or did Pearl Harbor, because they wanted Japan back. We have bases all over the world. I think there's only 2 countries left that no longer have American bases. Do you know what those countries are? Iran and North Korea. Iran and North Korea. There was a time when Iraq didn't have any, and Syria didn't have any, and Libya didn't have any, but those guys are all gone. And mind you, Gaddafi and Saddam all used to work for the CIA at some point. So what we've done is we've created our consumer markets all over the world. And in doing so, we had to use our military intervention to destroy the democratically elected government. You know about the Iran, and you know about the fake Shah that was propped up by the CIA, the countless coups that have been happening in Latin America from now, which is what's happening with Maduro and Guaido in Venezuela. But don't forget, back in 2001, 2002, we tried to coup Hugo Chavez too. We tried to, the CIA failed, but we've been doing that with Pinochet. We've been doing that all over in the Dominican Republic. We are creating a society of consumers who will buy the products that we make that at one point nobody needed a cell phone. Now we're all addicted to cell phones, right? There's a new market for cell phones. There's a new market for fast food. There's a market for Starbucks. There's all these markets. There's a market for water in Cochabamba that America can create, but they use their military arms. So I'm telling you, the military is not the enemy. Wall Street is the enemy. Wall Street is using American foreign policy to intervene globally to create markets and trade. And that's what the whole Cold War was, right? 1/4 of the world was communist. They didn't need the private production capitalism. You know, everyone could get a car for free after 15 years of waiting. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, but you know, I'm speaking from a historical perspective because I studied history and wanted to be a history teacher. So I look at the First World War and the reparations that Germany was forced to pay, how that led to the Great Depression, which I also blame on Wall Street because I almost think it was almost a conspiracy that was an intentional way to shut out smaller banks and other competition and isolate power. Then you had FDR, God bless FDR. I think Bernie Sanders would be the new FDR. Unfortunately, I can't vote for Bernie because he's going to be Democrat. We were hoping he would be our green guy, or just like Kucinich was, or we wanted Kucinich to be, or just like McKinney became from the Green Party. But FDR did a great job, but then Nazi Germany and the rise of fascism from Italy to Germany and German nationalism and the Aryan race all created World War II, which destroyed every system that we knew in global economics, in foreign policy, and foreign trade. Foreign trade got tied to the dollar until Nixon. Anyway, it all comes down to the fact that we need to make sure that there is no socialist or communist or self-governing autonomous government in any market that we can't get into, that we as Wall Street can't get into. If we can't sell them steel or rice or potatoes or iPhones or Starbucks, then we better. And the way we do it is we flex our military might. You remember Moab, mother of all bombs, that big giant bomb, just shy of a nuclear bomb that was dropped? I think it was Obama who did that.
In Afghanistan?
Yeah. And we did the math about how many lives it took versus how many dollars it cost. And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars per life it took. I mean, what a waste of money. Can you imagine if we wanted to take care of our homeless or our veterans or invest in public education or provide health care? But instead, we're building these phallic symbols to violence to justify our imperialism. Boy, get me on a national platform, because California, I'd love to do stuff for California, but really if we want to solve the problem, it's going to have to be global. It's going to have to be green. And I don't mean Green New Deal, I mean Green Party. And I'm not a single party person, but if you look at the Green Party, I'll tell you what the Green Party has that I admire. Green Party has a 500-year plan, a 500-year plan. The Green Party is in 90 countries. I mean, talk about a way of addressing the problem. Peace, immediately we have to deal with peace, and health and everything associated with health and peace. We have to save this planet. I think it's already too late. If you're watching what's happening in Arkansas, if you're watching the floods that are happening right now in the Great Plains, sea levels have risen. They're not rising, they're up. Sacramento right now is at 150% on our snowpacks. Every river we go by in the Twin River City is to the peak. It's raining right now. I mean, we had floods in '95. We had floods in the 80s. It's almost flood time again. It looks like it. It's highly frightening. So climate change now is inevitable. I saw a beautiful documentary called Drawdown, how using farmland, you can draw a lot of carbon back down. It seems like a very sustainable way to go, but we don't have 12 years. Whatever smoke they're blowing up our ass saying we got 12 years to turn around, it's a lie. I was in the 80s, I was in 4th grade when I discovered what was happening with the rainforest, and I realized we're past the brink of no return. We used to use these things called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, in our spray cans. We got rid of those. We healed the ozone, but the CO2 emissions, yeah.
Yeah. On that note, let me ask you, is there anything else you want to cover from your platform that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I really think that the solution for creating a long-term effective change is going to happen two ways. It's going to happen two ways. One, there has to be a grassroots, boots on the ground movement. There have to be people in mass. I think statistically it's 1 to 3% of the population. That's how the Civil Rights Act happened. That's how that's how we got out of Vietnam. There was enough boots on the ground. There was enough of a grassroots movement. We need one of those things. But simultaneously, on the other angle, you need to have legislation. If there was no Civil Rights Act, the civil rights movement would have not produced any fruit. If there was not a withdrawal from Vietnam, if there was just a bunch of people making noise, there wouldn't have been a policy towards it. If you think of tremendous policies that have made change for the better for women's rights, for reproductive rights, it was Roe v. Wade, which gave access to reproductive rights to women. It was a policy. I mean, it wasn't a law, but it was a decision made on Supreme Court that's pen to paper. Similar things happened with Brown versus Board of Education. Policy is important too. So if you want to change the world, you have to mobilize people. To mobilize people, we need to get them to get rid of the Democratic Party. I think we can talk to Republicans too. I urge your viewers and our listeners not to dismiss Trump voters. I think deep down inside, they saw him as a better option than Hillary, which is not a far stretch of the imagination if those are the only two options in your mind. You might want somebody who's not establishment versus the woman who's been dismissing poor people, been against gay rights, been a bombing and terrible as a Secretary of State. Maybe this new guy is a good option. We need to maintain a dialogue with them, but we need to reach their real values. Here's what I think. The Democratic Party has sown an image of themselves as being for the poor, being feminist, when they're not. I think at ground level, they think they are, but as you work up the higher in the chain, the more they work for Wall Street. I think I mentioned that earlier. So you have a lot of people, a lot of boots on the ground, run-of-the-mill Democrats and Republicans are all like, I want to help. I want to make a difference. I want to see the little guy win. I want small business to go. I want homelessness to be taken care of. I want women's rights. But their leaders keep voting for war. Their leaders keep voting for Wall Street. Their leaders keep voting for fossil fuels. Their leaders say fracking. Hillary Clinton said fracking. How are you going to vote for a leader and say you're a feminist and you're an environmentalist and you care for the poor when you're going to destroy the very planet through fracking? That's not going to work. So you have to talk to Democrats. You have to talk to Republicans. You have to say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe they don't represent your values. Maybe you want to look at another party. Or maybe you want no party preference. That level of boots on the ground is going to get the attention. But even if you do that, even if you have all these Black Lives Matter marches, even if you have all these anti-war marches, if you don't have candidates who are going up and running for those offices and writing the legislation that's needed to make the effective change, that's only one of the two planks, only one of the two rails that's needed to make effective change. We have to talk to people and tell them, where do your values lie and does your party really represent it? Have you seen Michael Moore's latest documentary, Fahrenheit 11/9?
No, I haven't.
There's this beautiful chapter. There's many beautiful chapters. He explains the entire Flint water crisis, and how that's an entire scam. You should watch it. But the most heartbreaking thing he does is he talks about West Virginia. In the West Virginia primaries, Bernie Sanders won all 55 counties. Every single county in West Virginia, the voters wanted Bernie Sanders. Guess who the delegates sent all their delegate votes to? Hillary.
Yes.
Why would you vote? Why would you ever vote if your vote ended up going elsewhere? Why would you be involved in a party that's going to co-opt you and make you go their way? The Democratic Party is not your friend. The Democratic Party has never been your friend. The Democratic Party claims to be the champions of the civil rights movement. Bullshit. SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Freedom Riders, these were the guys who forced their hand. You think Kennedy would have signed a Civil Rights Act? He could have, he didn't. Johnson was forced to sign a Civil Rights Act. It was the people who did it. It was socialists, they were communists, they were leftists, there were people who were libertarian, there were people who were not Democrats who forced the Democrats to sign the Civil Rights Act, and now they're claiming benefit from it. Do you know we had 2 presidents involved in the Vietnam War who didn't pull us out, who were Democrats? Why did the Democrats take credit for withdrawing us from Vietnam? Now, mind you, in 1968, Democratic National Convention, Chicago, there was a group who disruptors who agitated the convention, who were Democrats, but they were influenced by us, by the people on the left, by the people who were boots on the ground. Ocasio-Cortez, she should be a Green. Ilhan Omar, she should be a Green. Rashida Tlaib, she should be a Green. These new freshman congresswomen, they are really us, but they've gone to this party that's trying to silence them on Israel, trying to silence them on the Green New Deal. That party's not going to work for you. If we have to make a change, Michael, if we're going to make a change, we need to inform, we need to educate, we need to mobilize people on the street, and then we need to identify and put onto policymaking positions those people who have the clarity and the heart to be able to introduce legislation that the people will vote for.
Well, Sid, I hope you get a chance to be that person. You made a lifetime out of educating, and I think you're vying for a position that will help you do that on a state level.
Thank you.
Thank you for running. Is there a website you want to plug?
Yes, I have a website. It's got typos. I do it all myself. It's akbar2020.com. That's akbar2020.com, Akbar2020. It's my last name. At school, the kids just call me Akbar. The teachers call me Akbar. My first name is Sid. I love California. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to represent you guys. I'm in District 9. No, it's not related to that horrible Peter Jackson movie of South Africa. Maybe there's some parallels you can draw. But thanks for giving me the opportunity, Michael. Thank you for what you do for the party. Stay green, and I hope we stay in touch.
Excellent. And yeah, Sid, definitely, I thank you for running and representing us that way. Thank you for talking to us, and maybe we'll talk on different subjects in the future and keep getting the word out.
Thank you so very much. Yes, I'd love to talk to you more.
Excellent. Thank you.